1, verses 1 through 8. And it reads, "In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah," in some of your rendering it says Bethlehem, Judah, "left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and his 2 sons with him." There you go. Okay. Bear with me. The man's name was Elimelech and his wife Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephraimites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. When they reached Moab, they settled there. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Oprah. Everybody say Oprah. Not the Oprah, but Oprah. And the other woman named Ruth. Okay, and that's the individual we'll be talking about. But about 10 years later, here we go. 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone with her 2 sons, without her 2 sons or her husband. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. Okay. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me." Okay. Let me see how I can. A wonderful story of a woman named Ruth. If you see where Ruth is situated in the Bible, there's the Judges, and then there's Samuel, 1 Samuel. And again, this took place, Ruth's story, in the Judges, in the book of Judges. The Judges, if you remember when Pastor Francis was, we were talking about all the judges in the Bible. Some of the judges, you know, they were wicked and they did what they wanted. They turned their eyes from the Lord. And we know that the people of the Lord, they did wicked in the eyes of the Lord. And so great famine, in other words, this was God's judgment in those days. Great famine would come on the countryside. Now, I don't understand, I mean, I should say I don't understand, but sometimes we as men, we're going to take care of our families. We know that judgment came on the land. So this man named Elimelech, you know, you got to think about this. He has a wife, he has, you know, 2 sons, and they were going to go and they're going to try to make better their lives. So I'm thinking he decides to go to a country named Moab. And then, if you ever studied about Moab, Moab is literally cursed of God. They aren't supposed to even occupy that time, that countryside. And they, in fact, Moab is, how do I say this? They are like the raiders to everybody else in the AFC West. Amen. Eternal enemies, okay? I mean, the worst, I don't care who you are, if you're not a raider, then you're an eternal enemy. So it's the same thing with the Israelites when it came to the Moabites. They were, you know, those type of people that you should not associate with. You should live in their land, period. So that's what was taking place as far as Elimelech. He decides to go there and live, knowing that their crops. In other words, I have to provide for my family. Knowing this rule that we shouldn't go to these people, he still has to provide for his family. Again, this judgment that has come on the land, there was a reason for that. And we'll see that we see that God has his reasons for doing what he does. And when we think of the story of Ruth, and you get a chance to read chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4, you'll read and you'll see how this beautiful, it's a short love story. And that's why I coined this love and devotion. It's a short love story about a woman. Again, forgive my analogies, but she's a woman from the South Side. And she she struggles, and you know, she's living this life. She is a Gentile. Again, look at the genealogy of Jesus again in the Gospel of Matthew. You'll see her there. And I think it's important, again, she's a Gentile, and you'll see Boaz, okay? And you see Boaz and Ruth. And Boaz and Ruth, let me go down that list. I don't even have it in front of me. They begot a guy named Obed. Obed begot Jesse. Jesse begot King David. Okay, so you see the lineage. So it's important. You're thinking about, here's this woman named Ruth. She is a Moabitess, and she lives in this destitute land, literally, that is cursed of God. Eli Melech goes there to take care of his family, and I don't think there shouldn't be anything wrong with that, because I, as a husband, if I can't find work here in good old Stockton, but the way Stockton is right now, maybe you think that we're cursed of God. No, we're not, because there's a lot of people of faith here in Stockton. Amen? Okay. That's what I usually tell these guys that visit from other cities. They come in from San Jose, these prosperous cities. They come to Stockton, and they even say, these are Christian brethren. They usually say this to me, what good can come out of Stockton? You know, like we're like Nazareth, right? And I usually tell them, a lot of great things come out of Stockton. You know, I usually tell them that, right? And I says, you know, tell them all the things of people of faith that are here in Stockton, people that are faithful, and of course they're just teasing me compared to San Jose. When you think about San Jose, how prosperous that city is, you know, they're really blessed. But here was Eli Melech. He takes his family to Moab, and then the Bible tells us that 10 years later, he dies. He dies, leaves Naomi a widow. And the Bible also says that both their two husbands, they take on wives that are Moabites, right? Orpah and Ruth. They both die. So Naomi is a widow, and both her daughters-in-laws are widows. Wow. That's got to be tough. Because in those days, again, socially, remember those of you in our newcomers class, women weren't really counted. You know, it's all about the men, social status and all that other stuff. I was outnumbered in there, Paul. I was going to call you. But then we were just discussing that. And so the thing was, you know, here are these women who are left destitute, and we think about the homelessness of these people that we see on a regular basis. We're talking homelessness. They can't get a job. So the Bible even tells us that here was Naomi, at the very end of what I read, she tells her two daughters-in-law, go back to your mother's home, or go back to your homeland. And she literally is trying to tell them, go back home because you're still young enough and you could probably remarry, right? Because they're Moabites. I'm going back to my home where I'm hoping that my relatives there will take care of me, the ones that I go back home to, because I'm understanding that the Lord has now prospered the land. And she's thinking of going home. Now, these two daughters-in-laws had a choice. Oprah decided to, yeah, you know what, they both cried and they didn't want to leave their mother-in-law, but Oprah decided, you know what, I will go back home. That was the decision she made. Ruth, in turn, looks at her mother-in-law and she says, I'm going to go with you. And she says, where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. You see that? So basically she was making this profession of faith. Naomi, wherever you go, I will go. If you sleep, I'll sleep. She's going to follow her mother-in-law. And these are some of the virtues that we begin to read as you learn about Ruth. She was a very faithful, obedient woman, very young. Naomi became her mentor, more than her mentor, but she took her literally under her wing and taught her a lot of great things. They went back home. And when they went back home, and I'm getting to my first point. They go back home and something miraculous happens. And I look at this and I smile at this because I call this the providence of God. Amen? This is God's sovereignty, that big word, sovereignty. we use that word sovereign, but it means God is in control. Amen? And so when we think of God's sovereignty, here's that verse. It says, this is Naomi's reply. All right, my daughter, go ahead. And her daughter, Ruth, so Ruth went out to gather grain. And in some of your renderings, instead of gather, it's gleaning. Gleaming. That word gleaming is in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus teaches that those people that have agriculture of the day, they are to, through the book of Leviticus chapter 19, they are to pick everything. They're supposed to leave, the Bible tells us that, to leave some harvest. And this is the providence of God for the people that are homeless, those are destitute, the widows and the orphans, to leave all that is on the outside for those people. So Ruth, having the instruction, goes to I guess I'll say some farmland, and she begins to glean from the harvest. She's picking so that she could bring it home to her mother-in-law, Naomi. And this is the providence of God right here. I'm looking at this and I call this God's in control. Can we learn to surrender to God's sovereignty? And that's, as a church, sometimes we as people take matters into our own hands. And if we read about Ruth, did Ruth know all this was going to take place? And I underlined that passage right there where it says, so Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, meaning some of the other people that are there. There are other people that are harvesting. And then it says, and as it happened, and I want to emphasize that, just like a coincidence, it just so happened that the land that she began to glean from was a man named Boaz. And Boaz is not Naomi's husband, late husband's relative. Some of your rendering says kinsman, okay? It's kind of old world, old school, right? I said relative, okay? So they were related. And so, you know, I kind of wonder about this, about the Philippines too. I was always asking my dad, why are all the R's? Because when we used to go to my dad's lodge, and when I say lodge, it was like, it was the Knights of so-and-so of the Santa Catalina, something like that. Okay? In other words, all my uncles, their last names begun with the letter R. Okay? And my dad would go, oh, that's your uncle, that's your uncle, that's your uncle. Time out, Dad. Are they blood? No, they're not my uncle. I was American born, okay? You have to understand that, right? But they would say, well, he's my town mate. That was my dad's expression. So out of respect, because I see these, he was uncle. And they were everybody's names, and I was thinking, okay, what does all that mean, Dad? And because in the Philippines, certain parcels of land were given to certain families, and in order to keep it in the family, this is pretty much what they did. It's the same way when we think about this kinsman redeemer thing. When you think about kinsmen, certain land was divvied up or divided amongst the Israelites, and they had to keep it in the family line. It's like where I live right now, my children, if the Lord were to take me home,